Welcome to Fun and Fundraising, everybody. The podcast where we talk with people behind top nonprofit galas and signature fundraising events to showcase how they positively transform their communities. I'm your host, Rob Giardinelli, and today I'm really excited to have a special guest on. We have Julie Baker Finck, and she is the president and CEO of the Barbara Bush Houston Literacy Foundation. And they have several signature fundraising events throughout the year. They really do so much to promote literacy in the greater Houston area and really and beyond. And their fall luncheon coming up is called the Power of Literacy Luncheon. And, I thought it would be great to chat with Julie about this organization and how they really put on such great, fantastic events with very diverse audiences all throughout the year. And with that, Julie, welcome. And we're so excited to have you on as a guest today.
Thank you, Rob. We appreciate you spotlighting literacy and the Barbara Bush Houston Literacy Foundation.
I am glad to do it. So what is the mission of the Barbara Bush Houston Literacy Foundation?
The mission of the Barbara Bush Houston Literacy Foundation is to transform lives and our community through the power of literacy. We really work to advance former First Lady Barbara Bush's literacy legacy, a cause, as you know, she championed throughout her entire life.
And I remember that as a kid. She was always going to a school and always reading a book. And it was always on the evening news that she was, she'd be in so many different parts of the country. I was like, gosh, she's getting lots of frequent flyer miles when I was first learning what those were. So, she really was so tireless in advocating for that. So, I'm always interested, with guests that I have, because everyone's path to an organization and getting involved is very different. So I'd love to hear a little bit about how you initially got involved with this organization.
Sure. Well, I'm happy to share that. I've actually been in education, nonprofit and K through 12 education at a local level and the state level in Ohio for 30 years. So prior to my role here at the Barbara Bush Houston Literacy Foundation, immediately prior to this, I served 4 years on the executive leadership team of the Houston Independent School District, both as Chief Major Projects Officer and then as Chief Academic Officer. And in 2013, I represented the then superintendent on a citywide literacy council. And during one of the meetings, Neil Bush, who is the son of President George H.W. and Mrs. Barbara Bush, was present talking about his family's interest in developing a literacy blueprint for our city, and also sharing that the family newly formed a foundation in his mother's name. So I met Neil at that meeting, and over the course of the next few months of discussing what this blueprint was going to look like, how the district could help be involved and support the work, and discussing that strategy, he and his wife, Maria, we formed a friendship, and he asked me to lead the creation of the foundation. So the foundation was formed in 2013, and then I became the CEO, the founding CEO in September of that year, and that was 11 years ago. And it's been quite an incredible journey and opportunity, of course, working with the family, but also elevating literacy as a priority in the Bush's adopted hometown where they lived for more than half a century. So it's been just an incredible, incredible opportunity, Rob.
That is, it's amazing. I want to dive a little bit more, more into that. But I want to understand, 3 decades is a long time to be in a career, especially anymore. So what makes you so passionate about literacy? What is it about it that gets you up every morning and it's your life's work to want to have literacy for all?
Well, the seed was planted from a young child because my mom was an educator, and so I had no choice but to be a reader. And so I really didn't like reading as much growing up, and so my mom recognized that and told me to in my school library. And so as an elementary student, I was working in our library, helping to reshelve books. Of course, my mom had to get there early at the school, so I was in there reshelving, and that's when we had the card catalog system. And it was throughout sort of my childhood that I became more interested in reading. And those, of course, the reading competitions that my librarian always held, and all the little reading awards was certainly an external incentive to help keep going. But really my passion came about as my career. I really kind of got into my career and as an educator myself. I started out as a classroom teacher and, come full circle back, into my work at HISD here in the city of Houston. And I have become particularly passionate about literacy because I've been an educator and consider myself still an educator at heart. Although I don't directly teach kids, my focus is on education as a whole. And then, of course, I'm a pretty big avid reader myself. And so through my work, particularly in HISD, I truly recognize the importance of reading and writing in lifelong learning and success, but that also I've also personally seen firsthand the challenges facing so many children and adults in our community who don't possess appropriate literacy skills, and the limitations that low literacy has for them, whether it's kids losing hope and falling behind and eventually dropping out, and that going door to door, knocking on doors, encouraging kids to come back to school was pretty enlightening, as well as just seeing the pressures of teachers and the education system as a whole when children enter school lacking appropriate emergent literacy skills, and then that trickling on down. And so it's sort of like being able to see the impact on the individual level, on the education system level, but also I understand the impact on our society and our economy when we have a significant number of people who are functionally illiterate. And in fact, here in Harris County, 1 in 3 adults are considered functionally illiterate, and nearly 40% of students in HISD didn't meet grade level reading standards on the state's assessment last year. So it's a very pervasive problem. And so just understanding that we do have a problem, but an opportunity to really transform lives and to lift our community through literacy has just been something that I've gravitated and just been extremely passionate about, particularly being able to focus on it deeply the last 11 years that I've been here at the Barbara Bush Houston Literacy Foundation. And to me, I'm a no excuses kind of person. I firmly believe that we must expect and do better as a community and as a society in making literacy a priority.
Thank you and I actually have some follow-up questions, but starting with the evolution of of the foundation since its inception. But before we do that, I'd like to know, because I know that it was a platform of Mrs. Bush's, but I've never really learned why it was so important to her. So talk a little bit about why literacy was so important to the First Lady.
I'm glad you brought me back to Barbara Bush, because that's why we're here, and to utilize her incredible platform, and of course her indelible legacy that we're continuing to preserve and advance. I mean, she was one of the most beloved first ladies. She was everybody's grandmother, if you recall. And in fact, she because of her true focus and commitment and decades long dedication to literacy, she finally, and rightly so, earned the title First Lady of Literacy. And I think Barbara Bush will always, be known as First Lady, but she'll also, when people think about literacy and think about Barbara Bush, they'll be one and the same. And I firmly believe, and through talking with the family, that she really chose literacy as her cause because, first, she recognized that low literacy rates were a root cause, and still are a root cause, to many of the pervasive problems facing our nation and our local communities. I mean, literacy has become a community metric for assessing the vitality and strength of a community. And they're all tied, literacy rates are tied to a lot of important metrics like dropout rates, crime rates, unemployment rates, healthcare and healthcare quality, taxes, and so much more. And she firmly believed that if we could increase literacy rates just by focusing on that root cause, many of the problems that I just discussed would either be could systematically be addressed, and that we'd be a much more vibrant nation. And by breaking that cycle of literacy, again, it is generational. And what I mean by that is that she knew that if you could teach parents and families to read, that they would in turn teach their children, and so on and so on. And so that was one reason. And then I think also she, as a mother, saw value in reading to her children, and the bonds that could be formed, not just, again, the fact of teaching, but enjoying literacy and enjoying stories and empowering her own children. She wanted that for so many other families because she saw joy in doing that with her own children.
That is very well said. And I love, the through line of that is that reading really is the foundation for everything successful in life, or the success that one can achieve. That really is, it is a bedrock foundation, because even if you have a disability and you may not be able to walk, I mean, it is a more foundational thing than just about any other thing there is in society. It really is literacy. So hearing
Yes.
her talk about it from the perspective of a mom and a grandmom is amazing. And please feel free to add more.
Yeah, and I was going to say, bringing it to her family is that Neil Bush, who is the chairman of our foundation, actually is a dyslexic. And so taking, her, sort of her personal, affinity towards literacy is that, she has a child, had a child growing up. And Neil's, 60. And so, back in those days, there really wasn't a lot of research around dyslexia and reading disabilities and all of and the science now that we all know, so much more about how children learn and how the brain works and diagnosing, but also treating, and coping with some of these disabilities. She saw one of her own children struggle and struggle and struggle in school, and at the time, the staff at one of his schools had shared with her that he had a learning disability and needed all these they didn't know until she kept pushing and pushing and pushing and taking him places to get to really understand what the issue was, that he had the right diagnosis, which was dyslexia. And then at that point in time, they were able to help him. And so I think that she, through that journey that she had, an experience that she had with her own child, I do feel like she internalized that and thought, wow, how many other mothers, or caregivers are going through something like this, and that they needed advocates too. So I think it was stemmed from many things, of course, her wanting to pick something that could have a widespread effect, but I think it was very deep and personal, to her, this cause of literacy.
You know, what I really took away from that answer was twofold. One is that how it personally affected her, and she wanted to use her platform to broadly impact society positively. Two is, I think it is fantastic that Neil decided to pay it forward by starting an organization a foundation in his mother's name. I can't think of a more full circle of generosity than that. So, I know that you had mentioned the foundation started in 2013. Talk a little bit about how you all worked together to start it and how it's evolved, in the last, 11, 12 years or so.
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier in the interview that we really kind of started out with, let's create this, citywide blueprint. So we really focused first and foremost. The first 7 months that I was here at the foundation, it was just me as an employee, and we worked alongside Deloitte in 100 diverse cross sector of the community, to really kind of understand the problem. So really framing the problem of literacy here in our city, but to also come up with a strategic plan to address low literacy rates, both looking at children entering kindergarten to third grade reading rates, because that's a key indicator of long-term success, graduation rates, and then adult literacy. So we really spent some time being very thoughtful around, what does the research say, what does the data tell us, and what's the strategy forward. And so we really kind of focused, and then we sort of shifted into, now that we have a plan, what is the role the foundation can play in advancing that plan? So being a champion for literacy, elevating it as a priority, mobilizing volunteers, investing in evidence-based literacy programs. So we've really evolved over time, over the last decade. Last year we celebrated our 10-year anniversary, which we're so great, proud to do. But we really have become the preeminent champion for literacy in our city, a trusted source for information, a strategic thought leader, a mobilizer of volunteers, particularly through our 2 auxiliary groups, a convener of cross-sector stakeholder, and I feel a great curator of high-quality literacy programs and resources. So I'm very proud of the work we've achieved, yet I also recognize that there's so much more work yet to be done to lift literacy rates in our city. And I mean, our goal, our vision is to break the generational cycle here, but also to serve as a model city for others. We're not the only city here in our nation that are grappling with, you know, wide achievement gaps, low literacy rates, both at early childhood and adults. And so, we always believe that Houston is a can-do city. We're a very innovative city. When we see a problem, we go after it and find solutions. And so this is one of the problems that we want to be, a solutions-oriented city and a beacon of light and hope for others.
Thank you for sharing that. And, one question I have kind of as a follow-up for that is 4 years ago, we all underwent, we'll just call it the great pivot of 2020. We'll just call it that. We won't say what it actually is, but talk a little bit about, because that, that is one thing that, people have heard a lot about over the last few years is the disruption in learning. So how has that forced you all as an organization to kind of evolve with the changing times of really how education was consumed for a substantial period of time, especially in those K-3 years?
Yeah, and I'm really glad that you asked that, Rob, because I think a lot of times people have seen like, oh, the pandemic is behind us. Well, yes, we're coping with, the pandemic is still there. The COVID virus is still out there and it's morphing, but the pandemic is behind us, but the repercussions and the consequences will have a long-lasting effect. So, and I'll put it kind of thinking back to when schools shut down, and then we thought, oh, well, school will start the subsequent, closed in March, it'll open back up in, August, September, and we'll be on our way. Well, guess what? Schools closed again, and some kids did virtual learning. Well, fewer than half of HISD students ever logged into virtual learning. And so when you think about it, and then we had kids starting to come back a subsequent year. So we really had entering kindergartners come back to school as second graders. So we really, that gap wasn't just a few months, it was a very long time. And when we have 80% of children in HISD alone, and I'm focused on HISD because it is the largest school district here in our city. But when you have 80% of the children who are on free and reduced lunch, and we have 1 in 3 Houston adults are functionally illiterate, the gap in learning isn't being bridged at the home. They don't afford and can't do books. The libraries were closed down, so there's no access to books alone. So when we talk about just reading impact, and so what the COVID-19 pandemic did was it not only shined a bigger light on the problem that we already had, because we already had so many kids who were not reading on grade level as it was. Then you compile this shutdown of not just our education system, but our economy, our everything going on. And then it gets exacerbated. And then next thing you know, kids are in 2 grade levels, and they're coming back to school in classrooms 2 grade levels later without the learning that occurred that should have occurred before the 2 grade levels. And so what we're seeing and what we saw when the pandemic opened is that I know school districts had almost 2 different kindergartners, 2 different kindergartens, or 2 different first grades, because they had 2 different curriculums of kids who were ready and kids who really weren't, but they were still advanced and promoted to that grade level that they should have been in if they would have stayed, if all things were equal. And so my long-winded, answer to your question is that we have a generation. It's not just, a year lost, and we have a generation of students, both, and been talking at the younger age grades, but we also have middle school kids, who their last grade, they were in 5th grade, and the next thing you know, they're coming back and they're in 7th grade or 8th grade. So we've had a lot of gaps, and I really feel that, it's going to be it's a generation that has been impacted, and we're still going to continue to grapple with that learning loss, and it's going to take a lot. We're not going to see it. Obviously we're not seeing a lot of progress. We need to see much greater progress. It'll be interesting to kind of see how this year's reading scores come out. And again, I know the test isn't everything, achievement test isn't everything, but we can't ignore the data either. We have to look, assessments, there are value in assessments. And so just really monitor progress, being good stewards and progress monitoring kids. But we had a lot of kids, especially at the high school, that never came back. So, and they're in our society. And so I feel like it's going to be, we can't really dust it off and say the pandemic is behind us. The pandemic is behind us, but the reciprocating effects on teaching and learning are still with us and will probably be with us for the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things like you were saying at the beginning about reverberations, and it's just, it's almost like we're going through the aftershocks of COVID, and we will for quite some time.
Yeah, I love the
And
word. I love the word reverberation. I'm going to use that.
free to do so. Yeah, I don't have a trademark on that word anymore.
Okay,
So,
good.
so one thing, the Bush Literacy, Foundation does a really good job integrating into Houston. Obviously during the pandemic, you did innovative ways of doing that. But part of the reason you've all been able to have a good footprint on the community is because you have a strong board. And before anyone thinks, well, Neil Bush is, the child of a president, I know plenty of people who have maybe a head start with a platform who try to put something together and they can't. So they've got to have a passion and be able to walk the walk behind it. So I know that in addition to you, him and Maria were getting on the phone, making sure to get a really powerhouse board to
Yeah.
really implement change. So talk about how the importance of having a strong board is to implement your vision as president and CEO to have the Literacy Foundation really positively impact Houston.
Well, having a strong board cannot be overstated for any nonprofit. And I'm just so proud, that we do have a strong board. A great board, of course, empowers the leader, the CEO, but they also play an invaluable role in helping to set the vision for the organization, really focus and make sure that we're advancing the mission and the purpose and setting goals, but also creating a system of accountability. Because at the end of the day, we have to be good stewards of donors' dollars. These aren't our dollars that we're out, selling things and making money. People are gifting us, their hard-earned dollars to do something purposeful with. And so, having a strong board, it's imperative to our short-term success, but also sets the course for our long-term vitality and the sustainability of our programs. And so we've been fortunate. We currently have an incredible board of 12 members. Over the last few years, we've actually been growing our board. And when I first started, we had a board of 5 members. And so we've been able to add and grow more board members. And, of course, Neil and Maria, having family on the board has been very important to, and will always be in place because, again, it's the Barbara Bush Houston Literacy Foundation, and the family is very committed to this cause. We also have great business executives on our board, as well as education experts to help guide us in our work. And I think really for a nonprofit, looking at sort of what are the skill sets and the attributes, but also what can each board member bring to the plate, if you will, and really looking at it whole scale. So not just, okay, what is this individual, but looking at a board as a whole and saying what kind of skills. So we look at it as that we created a matrix and said, okay, what are the skills that we want to have represented across the board? And so not everybody who's on our board has every single skill set, connections, ability to raise money, media, education background, all kinds of things that we look at. And so looking at it holistically is very important, and continuing to do that as, maybe a board member term limits off or rolls off. How do you bring in new talent that will help, again, make sure that we're positioning the organization for strength and long-term vitality? But again, their role is to help guide us in our work, ensuring that we remain great stewards of donor dollars, support only research-based programs that kind of keep us on track, and then ultimately make a difference in our community. And that's really what we're about. So we're very fortunate to have very committed board members behind the Barbara Bush Houston Literacy Foundation.
Well, what I appreciate about that explanation, we've talked about this on this program previously, is you really mentioned the three types of capital that we like to talk about. And it's any successful board, and it's any successful event. It's social capital, it's financial capital, and it's human capital. And all three of them are equally and critically important to having, like you said, a well-rounded board that can really go and positively, impact change. And that's basically that same setup actually conveys to any signature fundraising event. And I love to pivot to that. That's the last time I'm going to use this word, this podcast. We're going to do that. And, you all host several really great, and I know you host many, many small events, but I know you host 3 or 4 really big signature fundraisers throughout the year. And I know that they each have, different target audiences. So talk about how the organization makes each of those big events unique in targeting those different audiences.
Well, we really pride ourselves on hosting the best and most unique charity events. And as you know, each year we host our signature event. Is called A Celebration of Reading, which Mrs. Bush actually created herself 30 years ago. This year we celebrated the 30th anniversary of A Celebration of Reading. And she had this vision, let's bring best-selling authors and to talk about their works. And we've kind of kept true to, her blueprint that she had for this event. And then we also are going to talk again today about our Power of Literacy Luncheon. And just to start with A Celebration of Reading, it is a very unique event from all other fundraisers in Houston because we host the program in the theater of the Hobby Center for the Performing Arts. And we feature typically 4 to 5 best-selling authors and notable entertainers. They come and they talk about their work, the research behind it, their personal stories. They just bring everything to life. And then following the 90-minute program, guests move from the theater and have a seated dinner in an area throughout the venue. This year did mark our 30th anniversary. As I mentioned, we raised more than $2 million and hosted more than 1,000 guests. So it is a huge event for us. It's there's a lot of corporate leadership presence, a lot of philanthropists, community leaders, of course, Bush family, and of course, advocates for literacy and education all come and gather for this special evening. And we're very fortunate. The last 4 years, we've also been blessed to have a partnership with KPRC2, and they don't come and record the live program, but we work with them while our authors are in town and produce a 1-hour commercial-free television broadcast too. So we've been able, because of our great relationship with KPRC2 and their commitment to the community and education, able to take that program and bring it to a much wider audience through television. And then our annual Power of Literacy Luncheon is hosted by our Ladies for Literacy Guild, which is a volunteer auxiliary group supporting the advancement of the foundation's mission. They're a powerhouse group of almost 400 women, and each year they host a signature Power of Literacy Luncheon, which spotlights a single feature speaker and author. And we have hosted some of the most amazing women over the years, including Dame Julie Andrews and her daughter. One year in 2019, we also recently had Kathy Lee Gifford. We've had, of course, hosted First Lady Laura Bush. And then last year, we were very blessed to host Kristen Chenoweth. So we always bring a featured speaker who is an author. That's one of the requirements is that they also be an author. And it's just a fabulous event.
It really is. And that's quite the impressive list of folks that you have gotten really just in the last 5 years, and it's, I've been in a room with most of those folks at one point or another, and they're all as dynamic and engaging and as fun as they are on stage as they are off. And not every public person is that. So it's always really nice to see you've had some really good folks. And,
Yes.
One of the things that makes an event a success are, having a good foundation with good, strong chairs. So talk about how you all go about selecting chairs, and this really probably applies more towards the luncheon and maybe the young professionals event to really create good, dynamic, successful galas and signature fundraising events year after year.
And for your audience, the reason why you didn't mention Celebration of Reading is because Neil and Maria Bush are the chairs. So that's an easy.
They do it every year, y'all. So that's how that works.
Event comes with built-in chairs, which is amazing. We love that. But for our Ladies for Literacy Guild and our Young Professionals group, we really selecting chairs is it's one of the most important decisions that you make. It's not necessarily who you bring in and the talent of the program, but you really want chairs that are passionate about your cause. So they need, whether or not they have a personal affinity for it or they're active in they really need to be passionate about your cause. We always love it, and like for our luncheon chairs in particular, we love when there's women who are already have experience chairing fundraisers, because our Power of Literacy luncheon typically raises over $500,000. So it's not sort of a fundraiser where, new people, it's easily to acclimate them to this, but the great thing is that it's been a fundraiser has a proof of concept and is success. So they're coming in with something that's already been successful. So you have a history there. I mean, we sell the majority of tables and tickets before we even come out with the event invitation. So it's great when you already have that baseline. A lot of times nonprofits, and I know we may get to this, or we can talk about this, is what if they've never had an event and they're wanting to start one? But we always try to, for our events, try to find experienced fundraisers. We don't always get that with like our young professionals group, because they are young professionals. And so we really try to find, again, it's more about that passionate. Are they organized and creative? Do they have a network? Do they have a network of people who can give or want to be involved, whether it's donating silent auction items, buying tickets, buying raffle tickets, bringing friends? You really want to have that network. And those chairs are really a great source of people who are we going to send the invitation to? Who can we cultivate? So you want that fresh network of people that you can build on from the year prior. And then you want someone who you can enjoy working with, because it's a lot of work, to do a fundraiser. And when we spend a lot of time together, over nearly every year, we're spending 10 to 11 months each year planning the next event, and you want to be able to work together well. So we always try to confirm the event chairs, even, like I said, right after the prior event, so that, because we get started, pretty quickly, because our events are very large. So that's really some attributes, some characteristics that we try to look through with chairs. Sometimes they'll volunteer, but sometimes you really need to cultivate, chairs. You may sometimes you just have to spend some time with them and make the ask. A lot of times people are going, oh yeah, I want to chair the event, because it's a lot of work and it's a huge commitment. So I would just, for the listeners who are, running nonprofits or involved in them, be very thoughtful around your chairs. And sometimes it takes a little bit of time to cultivate and, try to find their why, for why they would want to do this, and how their efforts can really lead to the success of not just the organization, but the impact that you're making through your cause. So really try to find that great fit, because when they're passionate about it, they're going to work harder, and you're going to have a more successful event. And everybody at the end of the day is going to be happy.
That is so well said. And every bit of what you said is absolutely 1,000% true. And one part that I want to focus on is, you talked about basically pretty much right after that event, you're getting next year's chair. And one of the reasons for that is, with the Power of Literacy Luncheon, for example, you've got to secure a guest speaker. And yes, it would be nice to call Kristen and say, Kristen, can you come next week? That's not how it works, everybody. So talk a little bit about how the organization vets authors and guest speakers, for the luncheon in particular, because it's a single, it's a single
Yes.
person.
Yeah, and I'm glad you honed in on that, because when we have the celebration of reading and I'm lining up 4 to 5 guest speakers, it gets a little crazy. And, just for everybody's edification, even though we're the Barbara Bush Houston Literacy Foundation, not everybody says yes. So sometimes, we're going through, a list of prospects and then kind of working our way down, and it's kind of a delicate dance, if you will. And sometimes it takes longer than others, especially when we're trying to get names like we talked about, Julie Andrews, Kristen Chenoweth. I mean, they're not waiting for our phone call, or their manager's not looking for something else to just add to their calendar. And so my approach is to work with the event chairs and we'll hold on, Power of Literacy, and the guild president. So we'll kind of have a meeting, and what I do is I do some research and say, okay, here are some notable people who either have written biographies or other books. We tend to have had, most of the people that we've had have written memoirs or have written books that relate to their life in some way. Kristen's wasn't, it was a little bit of a memoir, but it was a different kind of take on it. But I really try to work with and say, okay, here are some prospects. Here are people that have come out with books. But here I also try to do a lot of research around who is coming out with a book, because we want relevant. And, if you can cut the perfect scenario is that, an author is coming out with a book in the fall, and especially some of these notable people like Kathy Lee Gifford was coming out with a book. Actually, let me give you the example of Julie Andrews. Julie Andrews was coming out with her memoir with her daughter, that her daughter helped write, the week before our Power of Literacy Luncheon. That was the only reason, why we were able to really get her, was because she wanted to promote her book. And so we were the second stop. She did a kickoff event, a reveal of her book in New York. And then that next week she came and did our Power of Literacy Luncheon. So some of it's luck, but a lot of it is doing thoughtful research. So we really try to build, a prospect list. But I've been very fortunate, because I've been doing this work for the last 11 years, I've been fortunate to build a network of contacts, such as publicists and publicity directors in the publishing industry, to whom I can call upon and say, hey, here's our new date. Are there any anticipated new releases? Because sometimes you'll see coming soon, but it's not that far out and far enough out. So just kind of, and then just any celebrities who've published books or who have books in the works. Always try to look for either new releases, or usually an author, their hardcover will come out, but then a year later or so, the soft cover will come out, and so they want to re-promote it. So we always try to share our event dates with all of our contacts as far in advance. So we already know when our Power of Literacy Luncheon is going to be in 2025. So even we'll talk about it, who we have this year coming, but we always try to ask them to keep our events in mind, and it's attractive to them because the publicists, that's their job, is to promote the publicist's work and to sell books. And so if they know that this event, and again, we're hosting events that have 650 to over 1,000 people, that's a great audience for an author, whether or not you're a new author or a best-selling author, with a great repertoire of books to come and sell a lot of books and to get visibility, especially with the television show.
Mm-hmm.
So we always try to, look for authors. And then we have great host committees. We have readers. Our donors are readers, our host committee members are readers, my staff are readers. And so I always get speaker recommendations. And then, of course, the Bush family, they're all big readers. So, in fact, Neil sent me a name last week of an author that's coming out with a book saying, oh, what about, maybe we'll look into this. But we try to do research. And I always, authors are very interesting because they may be great writers, but they're not necessarily great speakers. So I have to do a little bit more of another layer where I'm going online and looking at interviews, whether it's television interviews, YouTube interviews, to try to see sort of, learn more about their story. How do they talk about their work? And, are they interesting, but can they speak? I mean, because they're standing at a podium, before an audience, or sitting on a moderated interview like our Power of Literacy Luncheon, and they need to hold a conversation. And so, there's a lot of work that goes into that. So research is a must, and that would be for any nonprofit. They might have a name or name recognition, but you really want to make sure that they're going to be someone who your donors and attendees are going to continue to talk about and say, you know what, I want to come to this event because it was so great. And it's not just because of the speaker. A lot of it is the speaker. But you want to have a great event and a great experience for everyone, because you want them to buy a ticket and a table before you even tell them who's coming. And that's really, our goal.
Absolutely. And I love how you kind of took everyone through and this really is a blueprint that Julie just laid out, everyone, that it's not just for authors. You can use it. It's for musical performers. It's really for anybody. Doing the research and understanding what they've got coming out when is a really good way, because if you're thinking 6 or 12 months ahead of everybody else, you're going to be much more likely to secure them. So I love that approach.
Yeah.
And,
and knowing your audience, who is going to appeal to a wide audience. And so I know, our Power of Literacy Luncheon, 95% of the attendees are women. And women, and again, we're talking about literacy here, women buy more books than men. And so you really need to understand your audience. And so who we ask to come for the Power of Literacy Luncheon could be very different than who we have come for Celebration of Reading. And for Celebration of Reading, where we're trying to find 4 to 5 speakers, we also really strive to have a diverse author lineup, not just for diversity from the sense of race, ethnicity, gender, but also genre. You don't want to have 5 thriller authors when, there's the number one selling genre is romance. You want to have, and I love, we were talking before this interview, like, I love historical fiction. You love biographies. You want to make sure that you have a little something for everyone in the audience. And, yeah, they may not have read or known about the author or the speaker, but you want to intrigue them. And a lot of times, I've had people say, oh, I didn't know, I've never heard of that author. I haven't read any of their books, but I'm going to now. So inspire your audience a little bit more. They may not, again, take them a little bit out of your comfort zone. And I know most people only have like one speaker. But again, choosing the right speaker is important because you want them to be a draw. You want the people to learn from them. You want them to be engaged. And again, feel good about the fact that they spent money to come.
Absolutely. Well, talk a little bit now. I think that's the perfect tee up about this year's luncheon. So tell us what guests can expect at this year's Power of Literacy Luncheon.
Well, this year's Power of Literacy Luncheon is going to be held on Friday, October 25th. And we're hosting at Post Oak Hotel at Uptown, which is, as you know, a fabulous venue. We love that venue, and everybody else does. This event is hosted by our Ladies for Literacy Guild and will be chaired by 2 of our founding guild members, Diane Gendell and Mernaz Gill. Our featured speaker, who we just announced today, it will be actress and best-selling author Kimberly Williams Paisley, who I'll talk about in a moment. And so, of course, we will have her in a moderated conversation format. And then in addition to, of course, the program, we'll have guests can participate in something we call a giving tree, where they can donate to stock books for our Curiosity Cruiser mobile libraries and get a gift back, a raffle sponsored by Tenenbaum Jewelers, and a silent auction. And of course, all proceeds benefit childhood literacy programs. But we're very excited to host Kimberly Williams Paisley. She is most known for, most of your audience might not recognize her name, but when I tell you that she was the charming bride and father of the bride and its sequel, now you have a vision of who she is. And again, she later co-starred in According to Jim. She was also in films like How to Eat Fried Worms, she was her voice on Alvin and the Chipmunks. On television, she also had a prominent role on Nashville and Two and a Half Men. She's been on Broadway. She also is an accomplished writer. She actually wrote an essay for Red Book magazine about her mother's dementia. And it was called My Mother, Is My Mother Gone? And it was very well received, and it got so much national attention because, of course, her name recognition, but also her story about her mother, that she wrote a full-length book in 2016 called Where the Light Gets In. And it's about her mother losing her mother and then finding her again. And so it is a New York Times bestseller. She, because of her focus and her personal cause, she's a very passionate advocate for Alzheimer, World Hunger, other charity causes. She and her well-known country star husband, Brad Paisley, opened a charity called The Store there in Nashville, where they live, designed to help indigent families rebuild their lives apart from public assistance. So she's a very philanthropic individual, very talented, very diverse repertoire, and very 25 years in the industry. And I just know she'll have a lot of great stories. I know President and Mrs. Bush always made time there when they go to the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo. One concert they never missed was Brad Paisley. So they have a personal relationship there, and we're looking forward to exploring her career, her life, her family, of course, her her philanthropic endeavors at the event. So it'll be a great time again.
It always is it always is a great time. And, thank you for sharing. I mean, that's really sounds like it's going to be a fun afternoon. And, everyone my age has known her. We grew up with her in Father of the Bride. So it's kind of like you need to go see her because she really is a dynamic, really
And the
fun
sequel,
person.
I mean, they even did a sequel.
That's right. They just did do a sequel. My God, they did, as a matter of fact. So I know we're coming up on time today, but before we go, you're such a good wealth of knowledge that I'd love for you to just offer one piece of advice you would give to a nonprofit CEO looking to do their first gala.
Know your donors. That's the number one thing. And that is really look for, if you're going to be doing your first gala, look at your donor base, identify those that have been loyal to you, who are passionate about your cause, people who have been seen, as, are they reputable? Are they philanthropic in the community? Ideally, again, you want them to chair or have held supporting roles in hosting a charity event. So and then seek input from your donor base. So even though you may only have one or two people chairing it, really encourage your donor base, especially again if you're starting off, to get input on what they would like to see. But again, try to be it's hard because we're a city of thousands of several thousand nonprofit organizations. You want to try to find something, but we always encourage you to don't make your program too long. Don't have too many people speaking. Don't make it too long, because that is like one of the most, you want to, there's a delicate balance of wanting to give people their money's worth, but there also is, something to say for like being on time and not thinking that people's time is too expendable. And to make sure that you leave room in your program to tell a story of impact about your mission and connect how people's dollars are going to be used to make a difference in the community. People want to give more, and there's something to say for like creating a short video and not having speakers on the stage, because it's hard to control how much time people use when you give them the soapbox. And you're shaking your head, Rob. Yes. Yeah, but you really can do a lot in a 3-minute video, a 5-minute video. And a lot of times people will remember that more so than the person up there telling their 15-minute story. So try to leverage, video. We're such a video heavy community now anyway, and our attention spans are so much shorter. So don't go over time, know your donors, use video, and oh no, you only told me to tell you one. And then establish a fundraising goal and make it known, because people want to help you, especially if they're passionate. They want to know how much money you're going to raise and where you are along the way, because people want you to be successful and to reach your goals. It's just how we are as humans. So
I am glad that you said that, because some organizations try to be super secretive with that. And I've never, this is like the 80th or 85th podcast I've recorded. No one's given that answer yet. So I really appreciate you giving that answer, because it is really important. It is okay to say how much you want to raise.
yes.
Go ahead and do it. It allows you to galvanize a group behind you. So,
and celebrate your success.
Yes, most important.
And don't forget, check the event calendar, because especially if you're starting out and you're having a first time event, know what else is going on in the city. Do not plan a fundraiser when the World Series is going to be, potentially be happening, or the Memorial Herman Gala is going on, or a celebration of reading from the Barbara Bush Houston Literacy Foundation is hosting. You don't want to compete with big events that are going on, that are already on the calendar. That again, like a lot of us that have big, multi-million-dollar events, they're on the calendar, and you want to make sure that you want to find a date and a venue as soon as possible, but try not to conflict with and create your own competition. And selecting a date is very important.
Absolutely. I think that's the perfect way to end. I would say mic drop, but we're going to say book drop, because that's what it's about today. It's all about the book. So Julie, I can't thank you enough for taking the time today. This was really such a wonderful, insightful conversation. And you can tell why this organization under your leadership just thrives and does so much for so many in Houston. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Rob. And again, I can't wait to see all your library there. It looks amazing.
Absolutely. And the Power of Literacy Luncheon, benefiting the Barbara Bush Houston Literacy Foundation, will be on October 25th, 2024 at the Post Oak Hotel in Houston, Texas. For more information, please visit bushhoustonliteracy.org. And that will do it for this episode of Fun and Fundraising. I'm your host, Rob Giardinelli, reminding you to keep it fun, keep it interesting, and your guests will have a great time. Have a great day, everyone, and take care.